The whole room went silent, not the polite kind of silent, where people are just being quiet. The kind of silent where you can hear someone's fork touch a plate 3 tables away. My sister-in-law was standing there, holding a glass of sparkling cider, smiling that smile she always gets before she says something that's going to hurt someone. And she looked right at me, 7 months pregnant, sitting in the chair of honor with a cardboard welcome baby sash draped over my shoulder, and she said, "Well, let's be honest. This isn't even the first grandchild. Let's not act like this baby is some kind of miracle." 28 people heard that. My mother heard it. My mother-in-law heard it. My 4-year-old niece heard it, even though she didn't understand it. And my husband, who had been sitting quietly next to me all afternoon letting his family run the show like he always does, he stood up. I want to tell you exactly what happened next, but first I need you to understand how we got to that moment. Because this wasn't the first time. This wasn't even the 10th time. This baby shower was just the day the dam finally broke. So let me back up. If this is your first time here, I tell real stories about family, marriage, and the moments people finally stop staying quiet. Stick around, because what my husband said didn't just shut down my sister-in-law, it changed our entire family for good. Let's get into it. My name is Jenna. I'm 31 years old, and 3 years ago I married a man named Mark, who I still think is one of the kindest, most patient people I have ever met. Mark grew up as the middle child in a family of 3. His older sister Chelsea, him, and a younger brother who moved out of state and mostly stays out of family drama, which honestly, I respect. Chelsea is 2 years older than Mark. She's the kind of person who was clearly the center of attention in that house growing up. Homecoming queen, the first to get married, the first to have a baby. And in a lot of families, that's fine. Firsts happen. Someone's always going to be first at something. The problem was never that Chelsea was first. The problem was that Chelsea needed to stay first, at everything, forever. And she'd figured out a long time ago that the way to stay first was to make sure nobody else's moment ever got to be bigger than hers. I noticed it early. The first time Mark brought me to a family dinner, Chelsea spent 20 minutes talking about a promotion she'd gotten at work, and when I mentioned, kind of quietly, that I'd just finished my nursing certification, she said, "Oh, that's cute," and turned back to the table like I'd told her about a hobby. I remember looking at Mark afterward like, "Is this normal?" And he just kind of laughed it off and said, "That's just Chelsea. She's competitive. She doesn't mean anything by it." I want you to remember that phrase, because you're going to hear it a lot in this story. She doesn't mean anything by it. That's the phrase families use when they've decided it's easier to excuse someone than to hold them accountable. When Mark proposed to me, Chelsea was one of the first people we told. Her response was, "Oh my God, congratulations." "Okay, but you know Mom's going to want to do the big wedding thing for you, since she didn't get to for me, right?" I eloped, remember, so this is her chance. She managed to make my engagement about her wedding within about 11 seconds. I laughed about it at the time. I didn't laugh about it later, when I found out she'd told our wedding coordinator that she needed to be walked in before the bridesmaids, because she had somewhere to be after, which delayed the whole ceremony by 15 minutes because nobody wanted to argue with her in front of guests. Every milestone in my life with Mark, Chelsea found a way to insert herself into it, dim it, or compete with it. When we bought our first house, she and her husband put an offer on a house 2 streets away within a month. A house they didn't need, in a neighborhood they'd never mentioned before, that happened to be slightly bigger than ours. When Mark got promoted to regional manager, Chelsea told everyone at Thanksgiving that her husband had actually been offered that same position at his company, but turned it down because the pay wasn't worth it. Which was a lie so specific and so unnecessary that even Mark's dad raised an eyebrow. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compared to how she acted about kids. Chelsea had her daughter, Sophie, 4 years ago, and it is genuinely the best thing that ever happened to that family, because Sophie is a sweet, funny, curious little girl who deserves every bit of love she gets. I want to be really clear about that, because this story is not about Sophie. Sophie is innocent in all of this. This is about her mother. From the moment Sophie was born, Chelsea made it very clear, in about 1,000 small ways, that Sophie's existence was a kind of trump card. Diane, my mother-in-law, doted on Sophie in a way that frankly any grandmother would. She's the first grandbaby, that's normal. But Chelsea took it further. She'd say things like, "Well, Mom already has a favorite, so good luck," to other family members who were expecting. She told Mark's cousin, when she was pregnant with twins, that twins are actually harder for grandparents to bond with because they can't tell them apart as easily. Sophie never had that problem. She said this, out loud, at a baby shower, for someone else's twins. So when Mark and I found out we were expecting, I felt joy, genuine, overwhelming joy. And underneath it, if I'm honest with you, I felt dread. Because I knew Chelsea, I knew what was coming. And Mark knew it too, even though he didn't want to admit it. We found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday morning, and I remember sitting on the edge of the bathtub with the test in my hand, crying and laughing at the same time, and Mark just holding me and saying, "We're going to be parents," over and over like he couldn't believe it. That moment was pure. I want you to hold on to that moment, because a lot of what comes next tries to take that purity away from us, piece by piece. We decided to wait until 12 weeks to tell anyone outside our parents, which is pretty standard advice. But Diane, bless her, she really is a sweet woman, just conflict avoidant to a fault, could not keep a secret to save her life. Within about 4 days, Chelsea knew. Her first text to me was, "OMG, congrats. Sophie's going to be such a good big cousin." Which, fine, nice, even. But by the second week, the tone had shifted. She started sending me articles. Not baby articles. Articles about geriatric pregnancy risks, because I was 31, which is not geriatric by any medical definition. But she made sure to use that exact clinical term in a text message, unprompted. She sent me an article about hospitals cutting corners on second-time mothers because they assume you already know what you're doing. I hadn't even had a first baby, but that didn't stop her from framing it that way. When I told her we were having a boy, she said, "Interesting. We always said Sophie would probably get a girl cousin first since I manifested it so hard." Manifested. Like the sex of my child was a competition she'd already entered and expected to win. At Thanksgiving, 4 months along, Diane asked if we had names picked out. Before I could answer, Chelsea jumped in with, "Oh, don't do anything too close to Sophie's name. That would be so weird. Everyone would always compare them." Nobody had mentioned any name close to Sophie's. Nobody was going to. She said this preemptively, defending territory nobody was fighting her for. Mark started noticing it too, more and more, and I want to give him credit here, because this is where his character really starts to show through in this story. He wasn't blind to it. He wasn't in denial. He was just, and this is a pattern I think a lot of people who grew up as the easy sibling fall into. He was tired of being the peacekeeper, tired of being the one who smoothed things over so Christmas didn't implode. He'd grown up his entire life managing his sister's moods so that his parents didn't have to, and by the time he was 33 years old, it was just muscle memory. Chelsea says something cutting. Mark changes the subject. Chelsea makes something about herself. Mark redirects. Chelsea insults someone. Mark laughs it off so the room doesn't get tense. I remember one night around 5 months pregnant, lying in bed, I asked him, "Do you think your sister is going to be okay when the baby's actually here? Like, actually okay, not fake okay?" And he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Honestly, no, I don't think she is. But I think if we ignore it, it'll be manageable. If we make it a big thing, it becomes a bigger thing." I want you to remember that too, because it's the exact strategy that fails in about 6 weeks. Ignoring it did not make it manageable. It made Chelsea think she had permission. By month 6, it had escalated from comments to full campaigns. She started a group chat, not with me in it. I found out about it through Mark's cousin's wife, called Team Sophie, where she posted things like, "Reminder that Sophie was the original miracle baby. No offense to anyone else." The laughing emoji doing exactly what laughing emojis do in messages like that, giving her deniability. If anyone called her out, she could say, "It was a joke, don't be so sensitive." I brought it up to Mark. I said, "This is not normal sibling stuff. This is her literally trying to make sure my baby is seen as less important than Sophie before he's even born." And Mark, to his credit, finally started to shift. He said, "You're right. I've been letting this slide for 30 years, and it's not fair to you. And it's definitely not fair to our son." He didn't do anything dramatic yet. That's not who Mark is. He doesn't blow up. He builds toward things quietly and then acts decisively, which you're going to see very clearly later in this story. But something in him had changed. He started pushing back on small things. When Chelsea made a comment at a family dinner about how 7 months pregnant Jenna Probably can't even keep up with a toddler like Sophie. Must be nice to still be in the easy phase, Mark said flatly. That's a weird thing to say to someone who's growing a human being right now, and didn't laugh it off. Chelsea got quiet. Diane changed the subject. But it was the first time anyone in that family had said, out loud, that Chelsea's comments weren't just harmless jokes. That was the crack in the dam. The baby shower is where it broke completely. My best friend Amy and my mother planned the shower together, which I was grateful for, because it meant I didn't have to think about logistics. I just had to show up 7 months pregnant and let people celebrate me for once. Which, if you've never been pregnant, I cannot stress enough how badly your back and your feet want that day to just be about sitting down and eating cake. We decided to have it at a small event space near my parents' house, guest list of about 30 people, my side of the family, my closest friends, and Mark's immediate family, Diane, Rick, Chelsea, Chelsea's husband Dave, and Sophie. I debated, genuinely debated, whether to invite Chelsea at all. Amy actually said to me, point blank, "You don't owe her an invitation after everything she's put you through this pregnancy," and she wasn't wrong. But Mark asked me to include her, not because he was defending her, but because he said, if she does something in front of everyone, it needs to be undeniable. If we exclude her, she gets to play victim to my parents for the next 10 years, about how we cut her out of the baby's life before he was even born. I'd rather her behavior speak for itself in front of witnesses than give her a persecution story to hide behind. I want you to sit with that for a second, because that sentence is the whole strategy of this entire story. Mark wasn't hoping Chelsea would behave. He was done hoping. He was setting the stage so that whatever she did next, she'd do it in front of 30 witnesses, with no deniability left. 2 days before the shower, Diane called me, nervous, the way she always sounds when she's about to warn me about Chelsea, without explicitly saying she's warning me about Chelsea. She said, "I just want you to have a wonderful day, sweetheart. Chelsea's been under a lot of stress lately, work stuff, and I know she loves you. She has a hard time when things aren't about her, and I don't want anything to spoil your shower." I appreciated the honesty, I really did, because it was more honesty than I usually got from that side of the family. But it also told me everything I needed to know. Even Diane, Chelsea's own mother, was bracing for impact. The night before the shower, Mark sat me down and said something I'll never forget. He said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know, I'm not going to let anyone make you feel small on a day that's about celebrating our son. I've spent my whole life keeping the peace in that family, and I'm starting to think keeping the peace and keeping people safe are two different things. Tomorrow, I'm choosing you." I cried. Of course I cried. I was 7 months pregnant. I cried at a car commercial that week. But I also felt, for the first time in months, like I wasn't walking into that shower alone. The morning of the shower, everything was soft pastels and string lights, and a diaper cake my mother had spent 2 hours assembling. My side of the family arrived first, and it felt easy, warm, exactly like a baby shower should feel. There were games, the diaper pinning game, the guess the baby food game that always ends in someone gagging on pureed peas, and everyone was laughing, and I remember thinking, okay, maybe today is just going to be a good day. Mark's family arrived about 20 minutes in. Diane came straight to me with a hug and a gift bag and tears already in her eyes, which is very Diane. Rick gave me an awkward sweet side hug and said, "You look radiant, sweetheart," the way fathers-in-law do when they don't quite know what else to say to a pregnant woman. And then Chelsea walked in. She was dressed impeccably, as always. She never misses an opportunity to be the best-dressed woman in a room, even a room that isn't about her, holding Sophie's hand, with Dave trailing a few steps behind carrying a gift bag roughly the size of a small refrigerator. She came over, air-kissed my cheek, and said, "You look so big. Wow. I never got that big with Sophie. Not you look beautiful. Not how are you feeling. You look so big." Followed immediately by a comparison to herself. I smiled. The practiced, pregnant woman at a party smile you learn to do after 9 months of unsolicited comments about your body, and said, "Well, every pregnancy's different." She laughed, this light little laugh that had an edge underneath it, and said, "Guess so," and moved on to say hi to my mother. Sophie, meanwhile, ran up to me and put her little hand on my belly and said, "Is the baby going to be my best friend?" And honestly, that alone almost made me cry, because that little girl had absolutely nothing to do with anything her mother was about to do. I told her, of course, baby, he's going to love his cousin Sophie so much. And she beamed, and I meant every word of it. The shower moved through its rhythm. Gifts weren't being opened yet. That was planned for later. We were doing the games first while people mingled and ate. And through all of it, I noticed Chelsea doing what Chelsea does, working the room. Every conversation she was in, within about 90 seconds, somehow circled back to Sophie. Someone would say, "Oh, we can't wait to meet the baby." And Chelsea would say, "It's so special. I remember when Sophie was born, the whole hospital just stopped. It was like nothing anyone had ever seen." Someone would compliment the diaper cake, and Chelsea would mention that at her shower, they'd hired an actual balloon artist. It was constant, small, deniable. Death by 1,000 cuts. And I want to be honest with you, by hour 2 I was tired. Not physically, though yes, also physically, my back was killing me. But tired in that specific way you get when you're watching someone try to steal the air out of a room that's supposed to be yours. Mark noticed too. I caught his eye a few times across the room, and he'd give me this small nod, like I see it, I'm watching, I've got you. He wasn't hovering, he wasn't tense, he was calm in a way that, looking back, I think was actually him quietly deciding something. And then we got to the gift opening portion of the afternoon. This is where it happened. I was sitting in the designated mom-to-be chair, a white wicker chair someone had wrapped in ribbon and flowers, with a sash that said "Welcome, baby boy," draped over my shoulder. Amy was on gift duty, handing me presents one at a time and reading out the cards. My mother was taking photos, and everyone had gathered in a loose semicircle around me, the way they do at showers. That cozy amphitheater of people who love you. I'd opened maybe 8 or 9 gifts, onesies, a diaper bag, a beautiful handmade quilt from Aunt Ruth that made me cry, obviously. And then Amy handed me a gift, and the card read, "From Diane and Rick." And inside was the most gorgeous, hand-carved wooden rocking chair, the kind you know took months to track down or commission, the kind of gift that says, "This baby matters to us." Everyone gasped a little. My mother actually said, "Diane, that's stunning." And Diane got a little teary and said something about how she'd wanted to get something really special for her first grandson. Innocent phrase, completely innocent. She meant it as in, "This is my first grandson, since Sophie is her first granddaughter." But that's when Chelsea, standing near the drink table with a glass of sparkling cider in her hand, said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Well, let's be honest. This isn't even the first grandchild. Let's not act like this baby is some kind of miracle." The room went dead silent. I mean dead. I remember hearing the ice in someone's glass shift. I remember Aunt Ruth's fork stopping halfway to her mouth. I remember my mother's face. That specific kind of frozen, wide-eyed shock parents get when someone insults their child in public, and they don't yet know if they're allowed to react. I remember looking down at this beautiful rocking chair in my lap, and feeling my face go hot, and feeling Sophie's earlier words echo in my head. Is the baby going to be my best friend? This sweet, innocent question from a 4-year-old, now sitting next to her mother's cruelty like a punchline nobody asked for. And I want to be really honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters for the rest of this story. I felt humiliated. Not just hurt, humiliated. In front of my own mother, my own aunt, my closest friends, at an event that was supposed to be the one unambiguously joyful celebration of this pregnancy that had already been shadowed by months of Chelsea's comments. I felt my throat tighten. I felt tears, not sad tears, that specific hot, angry, humiliated kind of tears, start to build. And for about 2 full seconds, which felt like 2 full minutes, absolutely nobody said a word. And then Mark stood up. Before I tell you exactly what he said, word for word, because I will never forget it, I want to know, has anyone in your life ever done this? Made a moment that wasn't about them, about them? Drop a comment below. I read every one of them. Okay, here's what happened next. Mark didn't raise his voice. That's the first thing I need you to understand, because I think when people imagine shut it down, they picture yelling, slammed doors, dramatic exits. That's not what this was. Mark stood up slowly, set his drink down on the table beside him, and turned to face his sister with a calm that was somehow louder than shouting would have been. He said, "Chelsea, say that again." Not, "What did you say?" Not, "I can't believe you said that." He said, "Say that again," the way you do when you want someone to hear their own words come back out of their mouth a second time, in front of everyone, so there's no room left to pretend it was a joke. Chelsea laughed, that same brittle laugh, and said, "Oh, come on, I'm just saying. Sophie was the first grandbaby. I'm not being dramatic. Everyone knows that." Mark said, "That's not what you said. You said this baby isn't a miracle. You said it in front of my wife, who is 7 months pregnant, sitting in that chair right now, holding a gift my parents got for our son. So I'm going to ask you again. Say it again, so everyone here can actually hear what you think of my family." The room was so quiet you could hear the string lights humming. Chelsea's face changed, that flicker you see when someone realizes the audience isn't going to laugh along with them this time. She said, "I didn't mean it like that. God, why is everyone being so sensitive?" And Mark cut in, still calm, still not raising his voice, and said the thing that I think about all the time now, the line that actually shut the whole thing down. "You've spent 7 months telling my wife, in 100 small ways, that our son doesn't matter as much as Sophie. You sent her articles about geriatric pregnancy. You made a group chat called Team Sophie and called our baby a participation trophy. You told Dave's cousin that twins are harder to bond with. I let all of that slide because I didn't want to make a scene, and every time I let it slide, you took it as permission to go further. So no, I'm not going to let it slide today. Not at my wife's baby shower. Not in front of our son's grandparents. You don't have to love this baby the way Mom and Dad do. But you do not get to stand in this room and tell my family he's not a miracle. I need you to understand something about my mother-in-law in this moment, because this is the part that actually broke the dam wide open. Diane, sweet, conflict-avoidant Diane, who spent 30 years smoothing over every one of Chelsea's outbursts, set down her cup, walked over, and said, "He's right, Chelsea. I have let you get away with this for years because I didn't want to upset you, and I am done doing that. This baby is just as much a miracle as Sophie was. You will apologize to Jenna right now, or you will leave." Rick, who almost never speaks at family events, said, quietly but firmly, "Your mother's right." And Aunt Ruth, the family's unofficial truth-teller, the one who says at every holiday what everyone else is thinking but won't say, put her fork down and said, loud enough for the back of the room to hear, "Finally, someone said it. I've been watching this girl one-up everybody at every family event since 2019, and I was starting to think I was the only one who noticed." A few people actually laughed. Not cruelly, just that release of tension laugh you get when something true finally gets said out loud after being unspoken for years. Chelsea looked around the room, at her husband Dave, who was staring at his shoes, not defending her, at her parents, who had just, for the first time in her life, sided against her in public, at the 30 guests who were all watching her, and I watched something in her face crumble. "Not soften, crumble," she said. "This is so unfair, you're all ganging up on me," grabbed her purse and said to Sophie, "Come on, sweetie, we're leaving," and walked out. She left her own 4-year-old daughter's gift bag sitting unopened on the table. She left before the cake was even cut. Part 7. The immediate aftermath. 45 years to 50 o'clock. For about 10 seconds after the door shut behind her, nobody moved. And then my mother stood up, walked over to me, wrapped her arms around me, and said, "Are you okay, sweetheart?" And I realized I was crying, but not the humiliated tears from before. Relieved tears. The kind that come when someone finally sees what you've been carrying alone. Mark sat back down next to me, took my hand, and said quietly, just to me, "I'm sorry it took me this long." And I told him, and I meant it completely. You did it exactly when it mattered, in front of everyone, with no doubt left. That was the whole point. Not to win an argument in private where Chelsea could spin the story later. To have 30 witnesses to the truth. Diane came over next, and I want to tell you honestly, I expected her to apologize on Chelsea's behalf and try to smooth it over the way she always did. She didn't. She sat down next to me, took my other hand, and said, "I've spent so many years telling myself she doesn't mean anything by it. Watching Mark stand up today, I realized I've been protecting her feelings at the expense of everyone else's for 3 decades. That stops now. I am so sorry you carried this pregnancy feeling like you had to brace for her at every turn. You shouldn't have had to." Amy, ever the best friend, leaned over to me during the cake cutting and whispered, "I have never respected your husband more than I do right now, and honestly, same." The rest of the shower actually turned into one of the best afternoons of my life. Once the tension broke, it was like the whole room exhaled together. We played the diaper game, someone's uncle guessed mango for a jar of pureed sweet potato, and we all howled laughing. Aunt Ruth told stories about Mark and Chelsea as kids that had nothing to do with any of this drama and everything to do with just being a warm, normal family afternoon. I opened the rest of my gifts sitting in that rocking chair's shadow, feeling, for the first time in 7 months, like my baby's existence didn't need defending anymore. It had already been defended, publicly, by the person whose job it was to do it. But I want to be honest with you, because this isn't a story where the drama just neatly resolves in one afternoon. What happened after the shower is, in a lot of ways, the more important part of this story. Chelsea did not apologize that day, or the next day, or the day after that. What she did instead, and if you've dealt with someone like this in your own family, you already know exactly what's coming, was she went to work rewriting the story. Within 48 hours, she had posted something vague on social media about family not supporting you when you're struggling, and some people only show up for you when it benefits them. She called 2 cousins and told them Mark had screamed at her in front of everyone and humiliated her at the shower, which was, of course, not what happened. Mark never raised his voice once, but Chelsea has always been good at rewriting scenes to cast herself as the victim. Here's where it got interesting, though. It didn't work. Not the way it always had before. One cousin, the one with the twins Chelsea had insulted months earlier, texted Mark directly and said, "For what it's worth, I heard what actually happened, and honestly, thank you." She said something almost identical to me at my shower, and I never said anything. Another family member told Diane, "Plainly, I was there. Chelsea started it. Mark handled it better than I would have." Chelsea tried, about a week later, to get Diane to intervene, to get Mark and me to apologize for embarrassing her in front of everyone. Diane told her, and this is a direct quote Mark got from his mother afterward, "Chelsea, I love you, and I will always love you, but I'm not calling your brother to ask him to apologize for telling the truth. If you want a relationship with this baby, the first step is acknowledging what you said was wrong. I won't be the referee for this anymore." That was the moment the entire dynamic of that family shifted for good. Diane, who had spent 30 years absorbing the emotional labor of managing Chelsea's feelings so nobody else had to deal with them, simply stopped. And without her mother running interference, Chelsea had to face the consequences of her own behavior directly, for maybe the first time in her adult life. It took about 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Chelsea not speaking to us, posting vague things online, telling anyone who would listen that she was the victim of a family ambush. And then, 3 weeks in, she called me. Not Mark, me, directly, which honestly surprised me. She didn't launch into a full apology right away, that's not really her style, but she said, "I've been thinking about what happened, and I think I said something really out of line. I don't know why I've been like this about the baby. I think some part of me has been scared that once you have a son, Sophie stops being special to this family. That's not fair to put on you. I'm sorry. I want to be honest with you, it wasn't a perfect apology. There was still a little bit of, I don't know why I've been like this, a little bit of externalizing, rather than fully owning it. But it was real, and it was more self-awareness than she'd shown in the previous 7 months combined, and I chose to accept it, because I believe people can change when they're finally forced to sit with the consequences of who they've been. Our son was born 6 weeks later, healthy, loud, absolutely perfect, 7 pounds 2 ounces. Chelsea came to the hospital 2 days after he was born, alone, without Sophie, and asked if she could hold him. Mark looked at me, I nodded, and she sat in that same style of wicker chair, different one, hospital furniture, and held her nephew for the first time, and cried. Real tears, not performance tears. She said quietly, "He's beautiful. I'm sorry I made you spend your pregnancy defending him instead of just loving him. Things aren't perfect now. I won't pretend this story ends with Chelsea transformed into a completely different person. People don't work like that, and I'd be lying to you if I tied this up with a bow that neat. She still has moments. A few months ago, she made an offhand comment about our son's sleep schedule being so much harder than Sophie's ever was, and I watched Mark's jaw tighten for half a second before he just said, calmly, "Every kid's different," and moved on. No blow-up needed, the precedent had already been set. She backed off immediately, because she knows now, everyone in that family knows now, that the days of getting away with it are over. Diane checks herself constantly now. She's told me more than once. I catch myself about to make an excuse for her, and I stop. Rick, of all people, has become oddly protective of our son, in a way I don't think anyone expected. Like he's making up for 30 years of staying silent by being the loudest advocate our baby has in that family now. And Mark, my husband, who spent 30 years being the family's quiet peacekeeper, told me something a few weeks after our son was born that I think about all the time. He said, "I used to think keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping everyone safe. I don't think that anymore. Sometimes keeping the peace just means letting the person with the least self-awareness set the terms for everyone else's happiness. I'm not doing that anymore. Not for Chelsea, not for anyone." So that's the story of the day my sister-in-law tried to tell an entire room full of people that my son wasn't a miracle, and the day my husband, for the first time in his life, decided that keeping the peace mattered less than protecting his family. If you've ever had someone in your life who needed every moment to be about them, a sibling, an in-law, a friend, I want to know how you handled it. Did someone finally stand up the way Mark did? Are you still waiting for that moment? Tell me in the comments, because I read every single one. And honestly, these stories are the reason I keep making these videos. If this story resonated with you, hit subscribe, because I've got a lot more of these. Real stories about the moments people finally stop staying quiet. And I'll see you in the next one.